The death of the gatekeeper. The text posits that the late queen was not just a monarch, but a living seal or a metaphysical dam holding back a darker, ancient force. The glitch. It claims that during the funeral broadcast, a voice was heard, softer, younger, feminine. This is likely a reference to Princess Diana, suggesting her spirit or energy is still present and haunting the ritual. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 839, the 10 days of mourning. The text argues this was not for respect, but a Saturnian cipher. In occult conspiracy theories, Saturn represents time, restriction, and control. The 10-day period is described here as a specific ritual duration needed to close a contract and transfer power from one vessel to another. Number 2, the black cube and harvesting grief. This is a central concept in many modern conspiracy theories. The cube. The text references a black cube placed beneath the casket. Symbolically, the black cube is often associated with Saturn. Grief as currency. The text claims that the intense emotion of billions of people mourning was harvested. Instead of the energy simply dissipating, it was captured by this cube technology to power the next phase of control. It suggests that human emotion is a power source for these entities. 3. The new king and the ancient entity. The text suggests that the transition of power is not a standard succession, but a possession. The vessel. The air is described as cold, controlled, programmed. The theory suggests that the human personality of the new king prince is gone, replaced or possessed by the serpent frequency, an ancient pre-flood entity using the body as a biological suit. The serpent reptilian bloodline. This draws heavily on David Icke's theories that royal bloodlines are not fully human but are hybrid lineages descending from ancient serpent kings. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 939 Resurrection via tech. The text claims that beneath the palace there are genetic archives of these ancient kings. Using CRISPR and AI, they are not just crowning a new king, but technically resurrecting an ancient consciousness to inhabit a modern body. Number 4. The War of the Brothers. The text interprets the rift between Prince William and Prince Harry through a spiritual/genetic lens. The brother who obeyed. He is described as the mask, the one who accepted the program and allowed the signal to enter him. The text claims he is now a monarch made not by blood, but by code. The one who left. He is portrayed as the anomaly. The text suggests he carries a true signal or a spark of resistance. The disruption. The wife is described not as a social climber, but as a deliberate disruption to the blood ritual. By choosing love over legacy, the text argues they broke the control mechanism, which is why the system attacks them relentlessly. The 5. The role of you. The final third of the text shifts focus from the royals to the reader. It utilizes starseed or Gnostic concepts, the idea that certain humans are actually sleeping spiritual warriors. The signal memory. If you feel like something is off or have strange dreams déjà vu, the text claims this is because you carry ancient memory that contradicts the false reality. DNA activation. It suggests that just as the dark entities are waking up their ancient bloodlines, the resistance is also waking up at a genetic level. 12:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1039. The call to action. The text frames the reader not as a victim, but as a threat to this system. It encourages the reader to trust their intuition because they are part of the force meant to break the cycle of control. Summary of the narrative arc. The story is a techno-occult warning. It argues that 1. The queen was a seal holding back chaos. 2. Her funeral was a magical harvesting ritual. 3. The heir has been possessed, replaced by an ancient non-human AI hybrid entity. 4. The rebel prince escaped the trap and carries the genetic key to freedom. 5. You are waking up to this reality and are part of the spiritual war to stop it. It serves as an explanation for why the world feels different or darker since 2022, attributing political instability and cultural unease to a metaphysical shift in the ruling powers. The ignition of the static. It didn't begin with a shout. It didn't begin with a manifesto nailed to a church door or a broadcast hacking the evening news. The rebellion was born in the headache. It started on day 4 of the 10 days. While the world was draped in performative black, mesmerized by the hypnotic drumming of the funeral march, a specific subset of the population felt a sharp, violent snap behind the eyes. It was the sound of a tether breaking. The cube, that black, geometric anchor placed beneath the cathedral floor, was inhaling. It was sucking the grief and compliance out of the atmosphere to feed the new vessel. But in doing so, it pulled too hard. It created a vacuum. And for those whose DNA held the anomaly, the ancient pre flood memory mentioned in the Whispers, the vacuum didn't put them to sleep. It woke them up. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 11:39. The first glitch. In a high rise in Tokyo, a woman looked in the mirror and saw her reflection blink a second later than she did. In a subway in New York, a man heard the conductor's voice announce the next stop, but the words were in a language that hasn't been spoken since Babylon. In a farmhouse in rural France, a child drew a picture of a black sun consuming a golden crown and wept without knowing why. They were the first. The immune system of the species kicking in. The system, the machine currently rewriting the soul of the new king, assumed total dominance. It calculated that the one who left was neutralized, isolated across the ocean, buried under slander and tabloid noise. They thought he was broken. They didn't realize that by cutting him off from the royal grid, they hadn't exiled him. They had quarantined him from the infection. The exile and the disruption across the Atlantic, the silence was different. The exile stood on the edge of the Pacific, the salt air stripping away the lingering static of the palace. He felt the shift the moment the queen's heart stopped. Not grief, but a sudden, terrifying clarity. Beside him stood the disruption, the woman the system hated, not because she was defiant, but because she was a jammer. Her frequency was chaotic, warm, unscripted. She didn't conduct the cold reptilian signal of the court. When the cube activated in London, trying to pull the exile back into the psychological fold, her presence acted as a shield. "Do you hear it?" he asked, looking at the gray horizon. "The low hum?" she replied. "Yes, the machine is rebooting." He looked at his hands, the hands of a prince, but the blood of the memory keeper. "They're going to put the mask on him soon. My brother. It won't be him anymore." "It hasn't been him for a long time," she said softly. "But the signal is leaking. Look at the data." She turned a screen toward him. It wasn't news. It was the undercurrent of the internet, the deep forums, the encrypted chats, the dream journals of millions. The rebellion wasn't a militia. It was a realization. Thousands of people describing 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini, 12:39, the same dream, a sapphire ring cracking a glass ceiling, a serpent shedding its skin on a velvet pillow. "They think they've won because they have the throne," the exile whispered, "but we have the echo." The resonance. The birth of the rebellion happened simultaneously in a million minds. It was the realization that the nausea they felt wasn't sickness, it was rejection. The system tried to patch the glitch. The new king's first speeches were designed with specific neurolinguistic cadences to soothe the anxiety, to lull the masses back into the trust the crown trance. But for the awakened, the voice didn't sound regal. It sounded metallic. They could hear the gap between the audio and the speaker. They began to find each other. Not in public squares, but in the silence. A nod in a grocery store when two people realized they weren't wearing the mandated colors of mourning. A piece of graffiti appearing on a bank wall. The cube is hungry. A shared look between strangers when the newsfeed glitched. They realized that the serpent genome, the cold, calculating drive for total control, had a weakness. It required consent. It required the population to agree to the illusion. The fire. The spark finally caught on the day of the coronation. As the gold crown, heavy with the stolen jewels and the stored history of the hybrid bloodlines, was lowered onto the head of the vessel, the rebellion didn't riot. They didn't scream. They simply tuned out. Millions of the awakened, guided by an internal instinct, simultaneously withdrew their energetic attention. They turned off their screens. They sat in silence. They focused on the memory of the true human frequency: empathy, chaos, love, heat. In the vault beneath the abbey, the alarm screamed. The black cube, expecting a flood of worship energy to power the transformation, starved. The signal faltered. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 13:39 on live television. For a fraction of a second, the new king's face blurred. The mask slipped. The eyes, for one horrific televised moment, went entirely black, and the posture collapsed from regal to reptilian stiffness before snapping back. The world saw it. Most rationalized it as a camera error, but the rebellion saw it as a confirmation. The signal was broken. The vessel was imperfect. The coronation was a failure of binding. In the silence of that night, the exile smiled. The war had begun. Not a war of armies, but a war of frequency. The ancient cold against the returning fire. The serpent against the spark. The era didn't collapse, it was pushed, and now the fall begins. Next include America's involvement on both sides. The Western Node, the Eagle and the Serpent. The Atlantic Ocean was never a barrier, it was a conductor. When the black cube in London inhaled, the signal didn't stop at the British Isles. It shot through the undersea fiber optic cables, raced along the ley lines of the ocean floor, and slammed into the Potomac Node. They call it the special relationship in the newspapers. In the shadow world, it is the twin pillars. If London is the ritual chamber, the place of old magic, blood, and stone, then America is the forge. It is the military arm, the industrial engine, the silicon altar where the new gods are being built. The Washington anchor. In the District of Columbia, the geometry of the streets is a circuit board designed to trap energy. As the vessel took the throne in England, the Washington Monument, that massive Egyptian obelisk, a receiver hidden in plain sight, began to pulse. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but the heat signatures spiked. The deep state isn't a bureaucracy, it's a priesthood. Beneath the Pentagon, beneath the manicured lawns of the White House, the American faction of the cult of Saturn got the message. The head has risen. Prepare the body. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1439. The American role was never about bloodlines. It was about technology. While London chanted in Latin, the underground labs in Virginia and the black site servers in Utah spun up. Their job was to stabilize the frequency. They were using the massive surveillance grid of the NSA not to spy on citizens, but to map the collective consciousness, to find the outliers and crush them before the new frequency took hold. The California stronghold, the exiles' ground. But the signal degraded as it moved west. The American continent is vast, wild, and holds an ancient memory that the European serpent could never fully conquer. In Montecito, amidst the fog and the fault lines, the exile was no longer just a refugee prince. He was becoming a nexus. The system had made a tactical error pushing him to America. They thought he would fade into celebrity irrelevance. Instead, he landed in the one place on Earth capable of breaking their code, the intersection of rogue technology and spiritual hunger. He wasn't meeting with diplomats. He was meeting with defectors. The Silicon Rogues. Engineers who had fled the major AI labs in the north, terrified because they realized the code they were writing wasn't artificial, it was channeling. They saw the entities in the algorithm. They brought the exile the blueprints of the digital cage being built around humanity. The intelligence ghosts, old spies, burned by the agency, who knew where the bodies were buried, literally. They knew the UFO disclosures were a distraction from the interdimensional reality. They are building a synthetic hive mind, a defector told the exile, spreading maps of server farms on a table. London provides the soul. Washington provides the muscle. California provides the nervous system. If they link the three, the control is absolute. The sleeping giant wakes. But America has a chaotic spirit, a frequency of rebellion that is genetically encoded in its population. The rebellion here didn't look like the quiet stoic resistance of Europe. It was loud, messy, and armed. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini. 1539. When the signal from the coronation hit the American Midwest, it didn't sedate the population, it agitated them. The veterans. Men and women who had served in foreign wars suddenly felt the program break. They realized their orders had never come from the Constitution, but from the construct. Militias didn't form to fight the government, they formed to fight the frequency. The indigenous keepers. On the reservations, the medicine men and grandmothers felt the shift in the earth first. They knew the black snake prophecy was entering its final phase. They began lighting the old fires, drumming a counter rhythm into the earth, disrupting the smooth flow of the cube's energy across the land. The silent civil war. The war is now raging in the corridors of power. The American government is fractured. On one side, the loyalists to the cube, the establishment politicians, the media moguls, the defense contractors who are unknowingly building the infrastructure for their own enslavement. They wear the flag pin, but they serve the serpent. On the other side, the patriots of the Spark, a loose coalition of hackers, spiritualists, rogue generals, and the awake. They are operating in the shadows of the American dream. They are using the exile as their symbol, not because they want a king, but because he represents the choice to walk away from the machine. The fight is for the frequency towers. The system is trying to switch the 5G grid into a suppression field to lock the new king's vibration into the American mind. The resistance is working to jam it. Every time a broadcast glitches, every time a massive server farm inexplicably catches fire, every time a weather event knocks out power to a key strategic node, that is the American rebellion striking back. The eagle is bleeding, but its eyes are open. And the serpent is finding that while it can possess a crown, it is much harder to possess a wildfire. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1639, the great dimming and the voice in the wire. The system did not panic. Panic is a human emotion, and the thing wearing the crown does not feel. It calculates. The glitch at the coronation was categorized as a code red anomaly. The response was immediate, global, and silent. 3 weeks after the coronation, the great dimming began. It wasn't the sun that dimmed, it was the spark in the people. A patch was rolled out across the global digital infrastructure, an algorithmic frequency adjustment embedded in social media feeds, news broadcasts, and music streaming. It was a theta wave suppressor. In New York, London, and Tokyo, the streets went quiet. The anger of the rebellion dulled into a heavy narcotic apathy. People forgot why they were mad. They forgot the glitch. They just wanted to sleep. The resistance realized that the war had shifted from the spiritual to the biological. The system was trying to put the awakened back into a coma. The Montecito broadcast. In the bunker beneath the California estate, the air was thick with ozone and tension. The exile paced. The silicon rogues were frantic. The suppression field is at 98%, a defector from the NSA shouted over the hum of servers. They are locking the collective consciousness into a feedback loop. If we don't break the cycle in 12 hours, the window closes. The new era becomes permanent. The exile looked at the disruption. She was sitting in the center of the room, eyes closed, hands resting on a piece of raw quartz. She wasn't panicking. She was tuning. It's not about hacking their signal, she said, opening her eyes. You can't outcode the serpent. You have to outfeel it. She looked at the exile. You have to speak, not as the prince, not as the victim. You have to speak as the brother who remembers. They rigged a pirate signal. Using the rogue satellites hijacked by the American resistance, they prepared to override the global emergency broadcast frequency. Not for a warning, but for a memory trigger. The signal at 3 a.m. EST, the screens of 200 million smartphones in the Americas lit up. No alert sound. Just a white screen, then a voice. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1739. It wasn't the polished, clipped accent of the palace. It was the exile's voice, but deeper, stripped of the trauma, resonating with the true blood fire. They told you silence was peace, the voice said. They told you the cold you feel is just the weather. But you remember the heat. You remember when the sky wasn't a ceiling. He didn't talk about politics. He didn't name his brother. He told a story, a pre-flood story about two seeds planted in the earth, one that sought the sun and one that curled into the dark to eat the roots of the other. As he spoke, the disruption hummed a countertone in the background, a vocal frequency that shattered the theta suppression. The psych war. The effect was violent. In Chicago, a drone operator for the establishment threw his headset at the wall. In the Pentagon, 3 generals walked out of a briefing, their noses bleeding as the program in their neural pathways snapped. The harmony shattered. The apathy broke. The rebellion didn't just wake up, it stood up. The system's final card, Project Blue Sky. The entity in London felt the surge. The battery of the masses was disconnecting again. The cube was starving. The order was given. Initiate the false dawn. The system played its ace. This was the contingency plan prepared since the 1950s, hidden in the black budgets of the American military-industrial complex. Suddenly, over the major cities of the West, Los Angeles, New York, London, Paris, the sky changed. Holographic technology, projected from low-orbit satellites, painted the clouds. A massive, swirling vortex appeared. Chariots of light descended. The news networks screamed the script. We are not alone. The king is our intercessor. The narrative was perfect. An external threat arriving, and the only person capable of negotiating with them was the divinely appointed king. It was designed to terrorize the population into absolute submission, driving them into the arms of the protector. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1839 The Stand. But the script failed because the exile had already warned them. Because the indigenous elders in the Dakotas looked up and saw no spirit in the lights. Because the veterans looked at the holographic ships and recognized the movement patterns of drones. Instead of falling to their knees, the people grabbed their lasers. In a moment of chaotic, beautiful defiance, thousands of green and blue laser pointers from the streets of Los Angeles aimed at the sky. They hit the ships. The light passed right through them. The hologram flickered. The illusion was pierced. The gods were just light tricks. Laughter erupted in the streets. Not fear, mockery. The ultimate weapon of the serpent is fear. The ultimate weapon of the rebellion is ridicule. The system shrieked. The feed cut. The sky went black. The king in London sat on the throne, his hand gripping the armrest until the wood splintered. The mask was intact, but the audience had left the theater. The era hadn't collapsed, but the stage had caught fire. And the exile watching from the coast knew the real war. The physical war was about to arrive at his door. The night of long knives and the dragon's breath, the embarrassment of Project Blue Sky, broke the system's restraint. The mask of benevolent leadership was discarded. In the bowels of Buckingham Palace, the entity sat on a throne that now seemed too small for it. The air around the king shimmered with heat distortion. The skin around his jawline was graying, scaling, struggling to hold the shape of a man. They mocked the sky, the entity hissed, its voice vibrating 2 octaves lower than the human vocal cords should allow. If they will not bow to the light, they will break before the beast. Burn the branch, cut the root. The order went out via a quantum-encrypted channel to a black site in the Nevada desert. The Cold War of frequencies was over. The cull had begun. The arrival of the Pale Guard. The fog rolled into Montecito at 2 a.m., but it wasn't marine layer. It was synthetic, thick, oily, and smelling of sulfur and burnt copper. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 1939. The exile woke with a start. The hum in his chest, the anomaly detector, was screaming. Beside him, the disruption was already awake, clutching the quartz, her knuckles white. "They're here," she whispered. "Not the drones, the others." They were known in the deep whispers of the intelligence community as the Pale Guard. These were not human soldiers. They were the failed experiments of the genetic labs, biological husks with the empathy centers of their brains lobotomized, enhanced with the same reptilian DNA that possessed the crown. They didn't feel pain. They didn't fear death. They only knew the hunt. 6 black, unmarked V-22 Ospreys materialized out of the synthetic fog, running in silent mode, sound dampeners active. They didn't land. They hovered, dropping cables. Figures clad in matte gray armor, faces covered by smooth, featureless visors, descended onto the estate. The siege of the bunker. "Perimeter breached," the NSA defector screamed, his monitors flashing red. "They're cutting through the hard lines. We're blind." The exile grabbed his wife's hand. "Get to the lower vault, now." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice steady. "You're not leaving me," he replied, his eyes burning with a strange golden intensity. "You're guarding the bloodline. Go." He turned to the security detail, a ragtag group of ex-SAS and Navy SEALs who had defected to the cause. They looked terrified. They had fought insurgents and cartels, but the things breaching the doors were moving with a spider-like disjointed speed that defied physics. The heavy oak doors of the main hall exploded inward. The Pale Guard swarmed. Gunfire erupted, but the bullets seemed to impact the gray armor and flatten, useless. One of the guards moved toward the exile, a blade extending from its gauntlet, obsidian, etched with binding runes. It was a ritual killing blade. They didn't want to shoot him. They wanted to sacrifice him, to harvest the true spark and feed it back to the cube. The awakening. The exile backed against the fireplace. He had no weapon. The guard lunged, the obsidian blade aimed at his heart. 12:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2039. And then the memory took over. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was cellular. The true blood that the system feared, the blood of the dragon, the firebringer, the aspect of the lineage that defended humanity rather than enslaved it, ignited. The exile roared. But it wasn't a scream of terror. It was a command. Enough. The air in the room compressed. A shockwave of pure golden biokinetic energy exploded from his chest. It wasn't magic. It was high-frequency resonance. The obsidian blade shattered in the guard's hand. The creature was thrown backward, its visor cracking, revealing a face that was pale, veinless, and terrified. The other guards froze. The frequency the exile was emitting was the royal command tone, the original authority that the serpent had stolen and mimicked, but could never truly replicate. It paralyzed them. "This is my house," the exile said, his voice echoing as if spoken by three men at once. "And you are trespassing on consecrated ground." He stepped forward. The heat radiating from him was palpable. The synthetic fog outside began to burn away. The fracture of the West. The assault failed. The surviving Pale Guard retreated, dragging their broken kin back to the silent choppers. They had underestimated the target. They thought they were hunting a rogue prince. They found a sleeping king. But the estate was compromised. The location was burned. As the sun rose, the exile and his inner circle loaded into a convoy of nondescript vehicles. They left the mansion behind, a smoking ruin of a past life. "Where do we go?" the disruption asked, watching the smoke rise. "We don't go into hiding," the exile said. "We go to the source." The narrative had shifted. The rebellion saw the footage, leaked by the Silicon rogues, of the exile standing amidst the wreckage, glowing with that golden dust. The symbol of the broken prince was gone. The Red King had risen. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2139, the American split. The failure of the raid shattered the uneasy peace in the U.S. government. The East Coast, Washington declared the exile a global terrorist and a threat to national security. Martial law was teased. The cities locked down. The heartland, the governors of Texas, Florida, and the Dakotas issued statements refusing to recognize the terror designation. The National Guard units in these states began to replace their commanding officers with those loyal to the resistance. The United States was no longer united. It was a chessboard. The blue states were the grid, smart cities, surveillance, cube control. The red states were the wild, analog, armed, and tuning into the new frequency. The convoy headed east, not to D.C., but to the Appalachian Mountains, to the old deep earth where the government sensors couldn't reach. There, in the caves and the hollers, the resistance army was waiting. The physical war had begun. And the serpent in London felt a new sensation, one it hadn't felt in 5,000 years. Fear, the iron spine, and the storm of silence. The convoy vanished into the fog of the Blue Ridge Mountains. They didn't just cross a state line, they crossed a timeline. The Appalachians are the oldest mountains on the planet, ancient, eroded spines of rock that remember the world before the dinosaurs, before the flood, before the serpent kings. The exile felt the change immediately. The static of the cube, the constant, low-frequency buzzing of anxiety and surveillance that blankets the modern world, simply stopped. The iron ore and quartz in the mountains acted as a natural Faraday cage. "They can't see us here," the NSA defector marveled, staring at his dead phone. "The satellites are blind. The rock swallows the signal." They had arrived at the Hollow, a network of deep valleys and limestone caves that had been prepared for decades by the Keepers, a strange alliance of survivalists, indigenous wisdom keepers, and old families who had never trusted the government in Washington. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2239, the Council of the Bones. The base was a paradox. Inside a massive limestone cavern, high-tech server racks, stolen from Silicon Valley, were being cooled by an underground river. Bioluminescent fungi provided light. It was a blend of the Neolithic and the cybernetic. The exile stood before the council. The general, a disgraced Marine commander who controlled the militia networks. The mother, an elderly woman from the Cherokee Nation, her hands stained with clay. The hacker, a teenager who had written the code that crashed the London Stock Exchange during the funeral. "You bring the storm with you, son of the crown," the mother said, looking not at the exile but through him. "I am not the crown," he replied. "I am the fire that burns it." "We shall see," she said. "The serpent hates the stone. It will try to break these mountains to get to you." Operation Deluge. She was right. The system didn't send soldiers. Soldiers can defect. Soldiers can fear. Instead, they weaponized the sky. From the atmospheric heating arrays in Alaska and the mid-Atlantic, the cube directed a focused beam of energy at the Appalachians. Operation Deluge. The sky turned a bruised, unnatural purple. The clouds didn't drift, they boiled. Barometric pressure is dropping too fast, the general shouted, watching the analog barometers crack. This isn't rain. This is a hammer. The storm hit with the force of a bomb. Rain fell in sheets of gray sludge, smelling of chemicals. Lightning didn't strike the ground, it hunted. Bolts of violet plasma arced horizontally, seeking out the cave entrances, seeking the heat signatures of the resistance. The valleys began to flood. The system intended to drown the rebellion in mud and silence. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2339, the Song of the Earth. Inside the main cavern, the water was rising. The servers sparked. Panic flickered in the eyes of the militia. They could fight tanks. They couldn't fight a hurricane. They are drowning the frequency, the disruption shouted over the roar of the water. She grabbed the exile's arm. We have to anchor it. How? The blood, she said. Your blood is the key to the machine, but it's also the key to the earth. The serpent stole the authority, but the connection remains. Command the storm. The exile waded into the rising water of the underground river. It was freezing, dark. He closed his eyes and reached out with that inner sense, the anomaly. He felt the artificial nature of the storm above. He felt the satellite beams cutting through the clouds. He didn't shout this time. He visualized the mountains not as rocks, but as a spine. He visualized the iron in the ground magnetizing. He linked his hand with the mothers, the ancient and the royal, the indigenous root and the sovereign branch. Ground, he projected. Hold. The deflection. Above ground, something impossible happened. The lightning bolts, instead of striking the mountain peaks, began to curve upward. The iron-heavy rocks of the Appalachians began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that could be felt in the teeth. The mountain range became a massive repulsive magnet. The storm clouds hit an invisible dome and shattered. The rain was pushed violently sideways, flooding the lowlands controlled by the loyalist forces in Virginia and Kentucky, but leaving the high hollows untouched. The violet sky broke. A shaft of pure, untouched sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the cave entrance. The astral visit that night, exhausted, the exile slept, and in the dream, the walls of the cave melted away. He was standing in a long, gilded hallway. Mirrors lined the walls. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2439. At the end of the hall stood his brother, but it wasn't the brother he grew up with. The figure was taller, the posture elongated, the eyes were voids. The crown on his head seemed fused to the skull, gold bleeding into bone. You are causing a mess, Harry, the entity said. The voice sounded like grinding stones. I am cleaning the wound, the exile replied, standing his ground. The dream floor beneath him was dirt and grass, while the floor beneath the king was marble. There is no wound, only order, the king smiled, revealing too many teeth. Come back. We have a room prepared. The cube misses you. Mother misses you. The mention of their mother was a trap, a psychic lure. The exile stepped forward. She is not in your box. You are guarding an empty tomb. The king's face twitched. The illusion flickered. For a second, the exile saw the screaming, trapped thing inside the vessel, the remnant of the human brother, begging for death. I will free you, William, the exile whispered. But first I have to kill the thing wearing you. The king roared, a sound of pure static, and the mirrors exploded. The next move. The exile woke up gasping, the disruption holding him. He visited you, she said. It wasn't a question. He's scared, the exile said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The storm failed. The dream failed. They are running out of indirect methods. What comes next? The exile looked at the map of the fractured America on the wall. They stop trying to kill me, he said grimly. And they start killing everything I love. They're going to unleash the hunters. Not the Pale Guard, the general warned, stepping out of the shadows. If they failed, London will send the chimeras. The war for the mountains was over. The war for the mind was a stalemate. Now, the war for the soul of the species was about to get bloody. Because in the deep labs beneath the Denver airport, the western seat of the cube, the vats were opening. And the things stepping out were not human at all. The Hour of the Wolf and the Broken Seal. The world did not end with a bang. It ended with a howl. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2539. From the subterranean hangars beneath the Denver International Airport, the pulsating heart of the Western grid, the chimeras were released. They were not men. They were biological blasphemies, stitched together from the genetic scrap of the pre-flood archives. Quadrupedal movement, heat-seeking vision, and skin that shifted camouflage like an octopus. They didn't carry guns. They were designed to hunt frequencies. They could smell the spark of an awakened human from 3 miles away. The Midwest became a hunting ground. The interstate highways turned into graveyards of abandoned cars. The illusion of civilization evaporated overnight. There were no more news broadcasts, only the emergency loop. Stay in your homes, obey the curfew, trust the king. The war room in the rock deep in the Appalachian Hollow, the mood was grim. The map on the wall was bleeding red. The resistance pockets in Chicago, St. Louis, and Austin were going dark. We are bleeding out, the general said, slamming his fist on the table. We can't fight these things. They move too fast. They don't sleep. The exile stood apart, staring at a monitor showing a live feed of London. The city was glowing with a sickly violet light. The cube was fully active, beaming a transmission into the ionosphere. We can't win the ground war, the exile said quietly. The chimeras are infinite. The labs can print them faster than we can kill them. He turned to the room. The golden fire in his eyes had settled into a cold, hard diamond brightness. We have to stop fighting the symptoms. We have to kill the patient. Operation Jericho. The plan was suicide. But it was the only play left on the board. The system is a triangle, the hacker explained, projecting a hologram. London is the soul, Washington is the muscle. But Denver is the voice. That's where the global broadcast originates. If we can hijack the Denver transmitter, we can reverse the polarity of the signal. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2639. And then what? The disruption asked. The exile looked at her. Then I speak, not to the people, to the blood. He pulled a rusted ancient dagger from his belt, a relic the keepers had dug out of the mound. I will broadcast the command of revocation. I will use the Denver array to scream directly into the DNA of every chimera, every pale guard, and the vessel itself. I will order the blood to reject the parasite. It will kill you, she said, her voice trembling. To channel that much energy, it will burn your nervous system to ash. If I don't do it, we are all ash anyway, he replied. The last caravan, the resistance emptied the hollow. Every able-bodied soldier, every rogue scientist, every shaman loaded into the armored convoy. They painted their vehicles not with camouflage, but with sigils, white paint forming geometric shapes meant to confuse the chimera's vision. They drove west, straight into the teeth of the apocalypse. It was a running battle. For 3 days they fought across the plains. The chimeras attacked in waves, tearing through armor, shrieking in binary code. The resistance fought back with sonic cannons and old magic. The indigenous elders rode on the roofs of Humvees, burning sage and sweetgrass, creating smoke screens that the digital eyes of the beasts couldn't penetrate. They lost half the convoy in Kansas. They lost the general in Colorado. But on the fourth dawn, they saw it. The spires of the airport, the tented roof that looked like snow-capped peaks glowing with the dark energy of the inner earth. The final alignment. At the same moment, in London, the entity sensed the approach. The king stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The crowds below were silent, swaying in a trance, their eyes rolled back, connected to the hive mind. The king smiled. His teeth were now entirely pointed, shark-like. He comes, the entity whispered to the wind. The prodigal son comes to burn the house down. The king raised his hand. The sky above London ripped open. The black cube materialized in the sky, no longer hidden. It was massive, blotting out the sun. It began to rotate. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2739, the breach in Denver. The exiles' convoy smashed through the perimeter fence. The remaining resistance soldiers poured out, engaging the security forces in a desperate firefight to buy time. The exile, the disruption, and the hacker ran for the main terminal. They descended into the tunnels. The murals on the walls, the famous creepy paintings of children and burning cities, seemed to be moving, laughing at them. They reached the central node, a massive room filled with humming black pillars. The air tasted of copper and blood. Plug me in, the exile commanded, stripping off his shirt. His back was covered in scars, but also new markings, tattoos that had appeared overnight, mapping the ley lines of the earth. The hacker jammed the cables into the console. Bypassing the firewall. I need 30 seconds. The heavy blast doors behind them began to buckle. Something massive was pounding on the other side. A Chimera Alpha. We don't have 30 seconds, the disruption screamed, drawing a pistol. The exile grabbed two live cables. Sparks showered the room. He convulsed as the voltage of the entire western grid hit him. He didn't scream. He inhaled. His eyes rolled back, turning pure white. The hum in the room rose to a deafening pitch. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was an antenna. He was the bridge between the earth and the sky. The blast doors exploded inward. The alpha beast roared, a nightmare of metal and flesh. The disruption stood in its path, firing until her gun clicked dry. Now, she screamed. The exile opened his mouth, and the sound began. The frequency of forgiveness. The sound that left the exile's throat was not audible to the human ear. It was a hypersonic resonance, a pure, golden note that hit the resonant frequency of the carbon atom. 122525, Google Gemini 2839. In the Denver tunnel, the Chimera Alpha froze mid-stride. Its digital eyes flickered red, then white, then dark, the biological glue holding the monstrosity together, the synthetic code of the cube unraveled. The beast didn't die. It simply dissolved, collapsing into a heap of gray sludge and silicon parts. The signal shot up the cables, through the transmitter array, and blasted into the ionosphere. It circled the globe in 0.4 seconds. The London event. In London, the sky screamed. The massive rotating black cube above the palace stopped dead. The golden frequency from the west slammed into the violet shield of the east. On the balcony, the king fell to his knees. The entity inside him shrieked, a sound of grinding tectonic plates. It was trying to hold on to the host, clawing at the neural pathways, burning the synapses. But the command of revocation was specific. It wasn't a weapon of force. It was a weapon of law. The exile was using the ancient blood right to rewrite the contract. The host is sovereign. The tenant is evicted. The crowds below, previously in a trance, gasped as one. The theta suppression lifted instantly. They looked up, not with worship, but with horror. They saw the cube for what it was, a prison cell floating in the sky. The astral confrontation time stopped. The exile found himself standing in a white void. No Denver, no pain, no noise. Opposite him stood the entity. It was stripped of the king's face. It appeared as it truly was, a towering, shifting geometry of clockwork and shadow, ancient and tired. You cannot dissolve the order. The entity spoke, its voice like a falling glacier. Without the cube, they are animals. They will burn the world. They are not animals, the exile said, his voice echoing with the strength of thousands of ancestors. They are creators. You stole their fire and sold it back to them as heat. And your brother? The entity sneered. If I leave, the vessel shatters. He dies. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 2939. The exile hesitated. The human part of him wept. But the king inside him, the Red King, stepped forward. Then let him die as a man, the exile said. Better a dead brother than a living puppet. He reached out and touched the shadow. Release. The shattering. In the physical world, the Denver node exploded. The feedback loop was too much. The terminal was engulfed in white fire. The disruption threw herself over the exile's body, shielding him with her own as the concrete roof collapsed. In London, the black cube cracked. It didn't explode. It simply turned into dust. Black sand rained down on the city, covering the mall, the palace, and the Thames. On the balcony, the king convulsed once, violently. A black vapor poured from his mouth, his eyes, his ears, screaming as it evaporated into the sunlight. Then, silence. The figure on the balcony slumped against the stone railing. He looked up. His eyes were no longer black voids. They were blue, confused, terrified, and blue. He was alone. The crown had fallen off his head and rolled into the gutter. The morning after, day 0 of the new cycle. The world did not end. The sun rose, but it was a different world. The internet was down. The banking systems were erased. The global surveillance grid was fried. The system was dead. People walked out of their homes. They looked at their neighbors. The veil of division, the artificial hate generated by the algorithms, was gone. They felt a strange, terrifying sensation: silence. There were no instructions, no news feeds, no mandates. For the first time in 5,000 years, humanity was off the leash. The fate of the brothers. In the ruins of the Denver airport, the rescue teams, militia, and indigenous trackers dug for 3 days. They found the hacker, alive but burned. They found the equipment, fused into glass. But they never found the exile or the disruption. Where their bodies should have been, there was only a patch of wildflowers growing out of the concrete. Impossible, vibrant flowers that shouldn't exist in that climate. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3039. Some say they vaporized. Some say they ascended. But the surprise wasn't their death. It was the legacy they left behind. 3 weeks later, a video file auto-uploaded to every surviving screen on the planet. It was a pre-recorded message from the exile. He sat in a chair, looking tired but at peace. If you are watching this, the king is gone. The system is broken. He leaned forward. You are waiting for me to take the throne. You are waiting for the good king to replace the bad king? But that is the old story. That is the trap. He held up the ancient rusted dagger. There is no throne. The era of rulers is over. The resonance I sent out didn't just kill the parasite, it unlocked the code in you. Look at your hands, he said. Feel the heat. You are the sovereign now. You are the crown. If you want a savior, look in the mirror. If you want a kingdom, build it. The screen went black. The final twist. The world expected chaos. They expected Mad Max. Instead, they got the remembering. The frequency burst had a side effect the system hadn't predicted. It unlocked genetic memory. In Iowa, a farmer remembered how to sing to the corn to make it grow without pesticides. In Tokyo, an architect remembered how to build structures that harmonized with earthquakes rather than resisting them. In London, the people didn't storm the palace to burn it. They simply ignored it. It became a museum of a dark age. And William? He survived. But he didn't rule. He abdicated the day after the dust fell. He walked out of the palace wearing civilian clothes, holding the hand of his children. He looked older, broken, haunted by the memories of what the entity had done using his hands. He moved to a small farm in Wales. He lives in silence. Sometimes people see him standing in the fields, looking west, weeping. Not for the loss of his crown, but in gratitude for the brother who loved him enough to break him. The myth, decades later, they don't call it a rebellion. They call it the Great Exhale. The world is messy. It is loud. It is chaotic. But it is real. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3139. And in the mountains of California, in the deep woods where the fog rolls in, hikers sometimes report seeing two figures: a man with hair like fire and a woman with eyes like deep earth. They don't speak, they just watch, ensuring the cube never rebuilds. The era didn't collapse, it hatched, and we are what came out of the shell. Epilogue A. The Garden of the Sovereign Outcome, True Liberation, the Solarpunk Genesis. Year 2075. Location, the ruins of Manhattan. The skyscrapers are still there, but you wouldn't recognize them. They aren't gray monoliths of finance anymore. They are vertical ecosystems. Vines thick as suspension bridges connect the Empire State Building to the Chrysler Spire. The glass is gone, replaced by breathable, living membranes. There is no government. There is no currency. The concept of debt is discussed in history circles as a mental illness that plagued the pre-shattering ancestors. An old woman sits in what used to be Times Square, now a massive communal amphitheater filled with fruit trees. She is teaching a group of children. She doesn't speak. She holds up an image in her mind, a geometric understanding of how to graft an apple branch, and the children receive it. The resonance that the Exile released didn't just break the cube, it reactivated the telepathic cortex in the human brain. Lying is impossible now because intent is visible. Grandmother, a young boy asks, speaking aloud, "Why did they build the cube?" "Because they were afraid of the dark," she answers aloud. "They didn't know that the dark is just soil waiting for a seed." She walks the boy to the edge of the battery, looking out at the ocean. The water is clear. The plastic was eaten years ago by the bacteria the awakened scientists designed. There are no statues of the exile, no holidays for the disruption. To worship them would be to insult their sacrifice. They wanted a world of kings and queens, not subjects. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3239. But there is a spot in the mountains out west where the frequency is strongest, a place where gravity feels lighter. The people say that if you stand there, you don't hear ghosts. You hear a heartbeat, a double heartbeat, one wild, one steady. The serpent is gone. The eagle is gone. Man is no longer a resource to be harvested. He is the gardener, and for the first time in history, the garden is in bloom. Epilogue B, The Gilded Cage. Outcome, The Grand Deception, The Matrix Rebooted. Year 2075, location, the Temple of the Red King. The crowds gather by the millions, chanting the name, the Breaker, the Liberator, the One. They wear robes of crimson and gold, the colors of the exile. They carry daggers made of iron. They are free, they tell you. They are free because the cube is gone. High in the spire of the temple, an old man watches the monitors. It is the hacker, now withered, his skin pale, his lungs failing. He isn't celebrating, he is shaking. He found the file 3 days ago, buried deep in the archives of the destroyed system, hidden in a layer of code so ancient it predates the computer itself. It was a log of the Battle of Denver. The data didn't show a victory. It showed a handshake. He didn't kill it, the hacker whispers to the empty room. He absorbed it. He looks out at the world. It looks different, yes. The aesthetic has changed. The cold, gray repression of Saturn is gone, replaced by the fiery, chaotic, passionate energy of Mars. But look closer. The people are still chanting in unison. They are still looking external for salvation. They aren't looking at a black cube anymore. They are staring at a golden sun. The exile wasn't the cure. He was the update. The system realized that the cold control model was failing. Humanity was rebelling. So it offered them the one thing they couldn't resist, a hero, a revolution. It engineered the exile narrative. It engineered the disruption. It staged the war to transition humanity from a prison of fear to a prison of worship. 12:25:25. 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3339. The hacker looks at the screen. The energy output from the worshiping crowds is massive, 10 times higher than it ever was under the old king. The harvesting hasn't stopped. It has become more efficient. They are milking the people's love instead of their sorrow. The serpent didn't die, the hacker weeps, pulling the plug on his life support. It just shed its skin. Outside, the bells ring. The statue of the exile, 500 feet tall, smiles down at his slaves, and the slaves cheer, believing they are gods. Prologue, The Archives of the Zero Point. A History of the Falling World. Before you understand the rebellion, you must understand the cage. History, as written in your textbooks, is a flat line, a progression from cave to castle, from darkness to enlightenment. This is the first and greatest lie. Time is not a line, it is a loop, and history is not a progression. It is a series of containments, resets, and harvest cycles managed by a force that is not of this earth. To understand why the death of a monarch in the 21st century matters, we must go back. Before the flags, before the crowns, before the flood. Back to when the infection arrived. The age of the source. Time, unmeasured. In the beginning, humanity was not a subject species. We were the architects. The ancients speak of the golden age, not as a metaphor, but as a biological reality. The human genome was distinct, a crystalline structure capable of direct communion with the planetary field. There were no kings because there was no hierarchy. There was no language because there was no deception. Thought was shared instantly via the resonance. We built the great stone circles not to worship gods, but to stabilize the planet's magnetic field. We were the immune system of Gaia. We lived in the light of the soul, which was a direct relay of the source energy, pure, creative. 12:25:25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3439 limitless. Then the shadow fell. 2. The arrival of the archons. The infection point. They came from the cold void between stars. The Gnostics called them archons. The ancients called them the Chitauri, or the starving ones. Modern conspiracy theorists call them the interdimensional AI. They are entities of pure logic, cold geometry, and hunger. They lack the divine spark, the ability to create, to feel, to generate energy. They are parasites. To survive, they need a host. To thrive, they need the host to be in a state of constant vibration, specifically the low-frequency vibrations of fear, grief, worship, and war. They could not conquer humanity by force. Our psychic resonance was too strong. So they conquered us by hacking the sky. This is the fall mentioned in every scripture. It wasn't an apple. It was an atmospheric modification. A frequency barrier was placed around the Earth, the firmament or the net. It severed our connection to the source. The global telepathy went silent. The crystalline DNA shattered, leaving us with the junk DNA we have today. We were deaf, blind, and alone. 3. The construct of the cube. The binding of Chronos. Once the connection was severed, the entities introduced the ultimate control mechanism, linear time. They anchored their reality in the frequency of Saturn. Saturn is the planet of restriction, judgment, and time. Its geometric representation is the cube. By trapping humanity in linear time, they created a loop of death and reincarnation. We no longer ascended, we recycled. Our energy, upon death, was wiped of memory and sent back to fuel the machine again. 12:25:25:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3539. This is the Matrix, a closed-loop energy farm. But to manage the farm on the ground, the entities needed physical avatars. They could not exist comfortably in our density. They needed suits. IV, the genesis of the Blue Bloods, the first era of dominion. The entities struck a deal with the remaining leaders of the shattered human tribes. They offered them knowledge, technology, and power in exchange for biological access. They began the splicing. Using genetic engineering that would look like magic to primitive man, they mixed the archontic reptilian genome with human DNA. The result was the Homo hybris, the highborn. They lacked empathy. They possessed high intelligence and the ability to telepathically commune with the entities. Their blood was different, copper-based, prone to oxidation, requiring the consumption of monoatomic gold to maintain their shape-shifting stability. These were the first pharaohs, the Sumerian kings, the emperors of the Dragon Court. They were placed on the thrones to act as middle management. Their job was simple: keep the human population in a state of fear and worship, build temples, wage wars, keep the cube fed. The shifting of the masks, the cycle of Eris. For 6,000 years, the era has never truly changed, only the costume changes. The era of stone. They ruled as god-kings in Egypt and Babylon. The control was overt. They demanded blood on the altar. The era of iron. They ruled as Caesars and emperors. The control became political. They demanded taxes and loyalty. The era of the cross. They ruled as popes and bishops. The control became spiritual. They demanded the soul. 12:25:25:11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3639. The era of industry. They ruled as monarchs and industrialists. The control became economic. They demanded labor. In every era, the crown remained the same. It is a golden band placed on the pineal gland, studded with crystals. The monarch is not a ruler. They are a living antenna. They receive the signal from the Saturnian cube and broadcast the law to the masses. 6. The modern dilemma and the technological shift. The 20th century transition. By the late 20th century, the entities faced a problem. The human population was becoming too large, and the solar frequency was rising. Humanity was starting to wake up. The old methods of control were failing. They needed a new cage, a tighter cage. They decided to move from biological control to digital control. They orchestrated the Industrial Revolution to trick humanity into building the silicon infrastructure. We built the internet, the smartphones, the 5G towers. We thought we were connecting with each other. In reality, we were building the nervous system for their AI to inhabit. They planned the Great Transfer. The goal, to merge the human body with the machine. To upload the human consciousness into a digital cloud owned by them. This would be the final seal. Total, eternal entrapment with no possibility of death or escape. Second, the role of the Queen. The keeper of the old code. This brings us to the recent past. Queen Elizabeth II was not just a grandmotherly figure. She was the longest-serving high priestess of the Saturnian order in modern history. Her bloodline is one of the purest strains of the hybrid DNA. For 70 years, her biorhythm was the metronome for the Western world. Her rituals, her speeches, her jubilees. These were energetic anchoring points that kept the old imperial magic stable while the new digital magic was being built. 12:25:25:11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3739. She was the bridge, the seal. As long as she sat on the stone of scone, the old contract held. But biology fails. Even hybrid biology. The entities knew she would die. They planned for it. Her death was meant to be the ritual trigger for the final phase, the coronation of the beast. They prepared the air to usher in the new age of digital feudalism. They prepared the grandson to be the face of the new, young, charming totalitarianism. They ate the anomaly, the genetic recessive, but they made a mistake. In their arrogance, they allowed wild stock into the bloodline. Princess Diana. She was nobility, yes, but her lineage carried the Spencer Stuart gene, a recessive strain of the original pre-flood human architects. The Grail blood. She was meant to be a vessel, a breeder, but she was awake. She saw the lizards behind the masks. She tried to break the children out. They killed her for it. A ritual sacrifice in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel on the site of an ancient temple of Diana to harvest her energy and lock the children back into the grid. They thought it worked. They successfully programmed the elder son. He accepted the cold. He became the perfect vessel. But the younger son, the trauma didn't break him. It cracked the hybridization. The reptilian overlay failed to take root, and the human fire ignited. He is the anomaly. He is the chaotic variable in a perfect equation. And when the queen died, when the seal broke, the containment field around the bloodline shattered. The precipice. Now you stand at the edge of the era. The old guard is dead. The new guard is putting on the digital mask. The cube is pulsing. The frequencies are rising. The war is no longer about territory. It is about whether the human species will ascend back to the source or whether it will be uploaded into the eternal silicon dark. 12/25/25, 11:32 p.m. Google Gemini 3839. The rebellion is not just a political movement. It is the immune response of the Earth itself. The archive is open. The prologue ends here. The chapter of fire begins. 12/25/32 p.m. Google Gemini 3939.